You are listening to The Catholic Wire.
Good morning and welcome to the Christian Mother. This is Father Zepeda. This is one of several installments where we will be discussing a topic that it's very important, and that would be the education of the children. Now, there are several factors, many things that we can know about education, and I think they would be useful. And to begin with, let's just realize why this is useful for us. Education is a job, like any other job, and when you want to do a good job with something, you need to know three things, right? You need to know what is your goal, you need to know what the tools are that you have to reach that goal, and you need to know what are the right processes that you need to do. You know, what are the right things that you need to fulfill in order to get that job done well. Well, the same thing applies for education. We need to know what our goal is for education. We need to know what are the tools that we have, and we need to know what are the right processes, the right ways to get that job done. This is a huge job if you think about it, education. It takes years to do. It has the most important consequences, and it's something that is not easy. So anything that we can do to help, we will be glad to help, and let us know what your comments are, as we will say later on during the show. Today we want to discuss a topic that it's basic, as I said, is very important, and it's kind of philosophical also in a way. It actually comes to us from the Greek philosophers, from Aristotle, and it goes down into the Catholic theology later on, and that would be how is the soul in your child made? What are the main parts, if you could say so? You can't say that the soul has parts, but what are the main characteristics of the soul of your child, the most important ones, when it comes to education? And that would be what we call the powers of the soul. You see, we know that every human being is made of body and soul, right? And we know that we don't have questions with the body, or at least we didn't used to have questions with the body. Now there's all kinds of questions about it, sadly. But when it comes to the soul has a lot of questions in there, and the Greek philosophers and then the Catholic theologians after them came up with a distinction in the soul. There are in the soul three powers, three forces, so to speak, that you as an educator have to deal with. And that would be what we call the powers of the soul again. And those are the memory, the intellect or understanding, and the will. Now, the memory and the intellect, I think we all kind of know what it is. The will is the one that gets overlooked. We all know what will is, but we don't take that into account very often when it comes to education. And that's why we run into so many problems. So that is the first thing to take away from this show. Your child's soul has three powers: the memory, the intellect, and the will. And you need to address the three of them when it comes to education. Now, this is not exhaustive at all, but from this we can come up with something interesting as well. The process of education then is going to have three activities, three particular things that you need to do when you're educating. And we usually only take care of one, and we totally ignore at least one of the other three or the other two of them. And that would be, we need to correct, we need to instruct, and we need to train. In other words, education has three main processes that are fundamental to do the job well: correction, instruction, and training. And if you think about it, the three of them correspond to the three powers of the soul. You have to correct, and that is something that sticks in the memory. You have to instruct, and that is something that goes to the intellect. And you have to train, and that is something that builds up the will. Remember what we said, or I've said somewhere else, the will is kind of like a spiritual muscle that your child has. You train your child's muscles, you make them stronger, you make them be able to do work. And the same thing happens with the soul. The soul has some kind of a spiritual muscle that you have to train and build up, and that is the will. And for that, you would have the training. Now, I was saying, when it comes to education, many times we will make sure that our child is corrected, hopefully. We will see perhaps that our child is instructed, but many times we overlook the part of training, the part of the formation of the will. And that is something that is huge, is very, very important. So the other thing that we can take away from this show today is that education has 3 main fundamental processes that we need to address: correction, instruction, and training. And I want to go, before we go into a break, I want to go into detail, like put some practical imagery, try to imagine how does this work into place. Most of the times what happens if your child, you have a teenager and you're having problems with him, and he comes over and he tells you something, and then you yell at him and you tell him that was wrong, blah, 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 and you go back to your room or something of the sort. And that was correction. But the question is, where was the memory used in there? Did you use the memory of the child? The question is, where did you do the instruction? When did you tell him why, or what was he supposed to do? And then where was the training as well? I'll give an example of something that happened when I was teaching 7th and 8th grade. I had a particular student who was needed to be corrected, needed to be punished. And of course, nowadays you cannot go to physical punishment. In that case, I wouldn't go anyways. But the problem was, the usual punishment would be lines. You would give them lines. And this person, it came to a point where I would give them lines. They would do the lines, then give me the lines, and then just go back to whatever they used to do. And that was, well, obviously not good. So it dawned on me, that part. I'm doing the lines, and I'm doing the instruction part, supposedly. But why is this not working? So I figured one day that person told me, I don't even care about the lines. It doesn't hurt me. So I was like, okay, well, we have to find something else. So on a certain day, for the punishment, what I did was this. That person had been rude. That person had answered to me in a improper way. So I told that person, you'll be punished today after school. Just lines. No, not lines. Here's what you're going to do. After school, you're going to be over here, and you're going to repeat to me 50 times, yes, teacher, I want to do this right now. They had to repeat to me the exact same, what they should have said, the proper way of answering, in a proper way and with the proper gesture. And that was incredibly funny for that person and for myself. We actually had a really good time. But it was interesting because it was a process of training. And so after that, I ended up just, instead of lines, that's what I would do. I would say, okay, after school, we're going to stay here and you're going to have to talk to me in this way, or you're going to have to do this. Say, for example, if one day I would tell that person to pick up something or to do something and they would disobey, then after school I would say, okay, I'm going to put this on the floor and you're going to pick it up, and I'm going to ask you to pick it up and you're going to say yes, and I'll pick it up. And so I will put it on the floor. Can you pick that up, please? Oh, yes, pick it up. Then put it again on the floor, and that person would have to do that over and over again for 30 or 40 times, and that was training. Now, there are many things that we need to talk about, and I don't do that with your children, at least not yet. But it kind of illustrates the point. You need to train the will. So that was then the second thing that we can get from our show today. You have to train both, or you have to work with the memory, the understanding, and the will. How would you work with the understanding? Well, you work with the understanding by explaining to the person, why is this wrong? Why is the other thing right? And why do you want to do that? What is the truth about all these things? Say, for example, son, why are you not supposed to answer to your mother in that way? Well, first of all, son, your mother suffered a huge deal for you. Your mother is the representative of God to you, and so when you're disrespectful to her, you're disrespectful to God, because God has put your mother here to train you and to help you and to guide you, and is kind of a representative of God. And so there are many other reasons that you could find. But you explain those things to them. And why is it wrong to talk to your mother like that? Because you're being very ungrateful of all the things that she has done to you, because you're being uncharitable. You're talking to her as if she was someone that means nothing to you, when you know that you love her and she loves you back. Again, try to find reasons. And then finally, how do you work with the memory? Well, you work with the memory by saying, do you remember what happened the last time you did this? How you got punished? How this and this happened, and what you said back then. Try to exercise the memory and make them kind of realizing those things. All these things, of course, are not magic tricks. This is not going to solve all your problems. What I'm saying is that you need to pay attention into those things, these things in particular. Now, we will go into a break, a very short break here, and we will be right back. In the Catholic Wire, we greatly appreciate your questions and stories, and we would like to feature them on the air. If you have anything you would like to share, please send it as a voice message, and we may select it to appear in our podcast. So in the previous part of the show, we covered two basic points. The first one is the powers of the soul. Your child has three powers that you need to take care of. That is the memory, the understanding, and the will. And secondly, your child has, because of these three powers, you have a duty to do three main activities when you're educating your child, and that would be first, working with the memory, and that would be correction. Second, working with the intellect, and that would be instruction. And third, working with the will, and that would be training. You have to train your child. Now, following on these lines, there is some comments that we could make. Today, there's a great error in the world where we mistake education with instruction. They're not the same. Everybody instructs their child. The government insists a lot. What is instruction, first of all? Instruction is giving information to the intellect, giving information to the understanding. And that is very good. Information about, different languages, information about how to use a computer, information about math, philosophy, science, history. All those things are very good and they are very necessary. Catechism, of course. But education is not just that. Instruction is just one part of education. What is the difference? Education is aimed at the will, to work with the will, to strengthen the will, to make it, to put in the will habits, good habits that are noble, such as the habit of religion, the habit of being moral, the habit of being virtuous both in public and in private, the habit of justice, and especially the habit of love of God and love of neighbor. And you can see here that education is way more than just instruction. Education comprises the whole human being. Now, the main and the most grave and serious mistake that is being done today in this world is that we appreciate greatly and we put all the emphasis into instruction and we leave aside education. Absolutely. There are schools of all kinds. There is universities, there is, trade schools, there is school for this, school for that. You can get a certification on, how to weld, how to do this, how to work with networks, how to program, how to do design work, gyms, all these things. And all these schools are aimed at and making these people and closing them into something that they need to do. And not only that, they force everyone to go through those schools, because you can't get an honest job, you can't get a good job unless you have gone through these I can't find any other word, crazy colleges and schools sometimes. And in some countries, I hope America doesn't get there, but in some countries, you're actually forced. It's by law that you have to send your children to these schools. A lot of instruction. What do they do when it comes to education? They do nothing. Absolutely nothing. And worse than nothing, because they actually go against education. Why is that? Because you cannot... We're talking about education is the instruction of the will, right? And you can't obtain that. You can't instruct the will unless you have religion, because religion is the only foundation that there is for morality and for the will. If you take religion out, there is really not a powerful reason to do good and to avoid evil. And the problem is that today religion is excluded, is taken out from schools. In schools, they don't want any religion, they don't want any praying, they don't want any catechism, they do not want a priest at all. In Mexico, for example, it's forbidden, absolutely forbidden, to have a priest working in any way in a school. So from that moment on, education is taken out from schools. It's crazy, but that's exactly what it is. There is no education in schools. There is instruction, but not education. What about the teachers? Maybe they do it. Well, education would require that the people, the teachers, are men and women of virtue, that they are good men and women, and obviously religious. But not only are the teachers not chosen among religious people, but now there is a system where you will entrust teaching to corrupt people, to atheists, to communists, excluding as much as you can religious people. And so instead of forming the will, you corrupt the will in those schools. I'm not here rambling about this. I am not here complaining about this. It's just a fact of history. It's just a fact that is absolutely evident to everyone. Now, in schools nowadays, especially in public schools, we're having the problem where, so as we mentioned, we are not training the will, so there is no education. But also, instruction is totally gone, is totally corrupted. They do not teach the truth anymore, but they mix it with error, or to say it in the best way, they teach error. They teach theories that are conceived to destroy religion. And from here we see that in spite of all that noise, in spite of all that pretense that we are teaching children, that we are educating children, that is not happening. There is a big problem when you have someone that is very instructed, but it's not educated, and that is what we see today worldwide, everywhere. Because when you have a person whose intellect is filled with stuff, but whose will is not trained to do good, that person becomes filled with pride. Because pride is one of the main problems when you have a corrupt will. And so if you have someone that is filled with knowledge, but is totally corrupt in the will, that person is going to be filled with pride. And there is nothing more dangerous, I remember hearing from someone, there is nothing more dangerous than an ignorant man who thinks he knows, who thinks he's wise. I remember where I heard that. That's actually from the Bible. Now, something else that is actually interesting. In Latin and in Spanish and in most languages, there's a play of words. Notice this: science and conscience. if you hear that in Spanish or in Latin, they're actually almost the same word. It's ciencia and conciencia, as if to say the intellect, science, is part of it. The will, conscience, conciencia, that's the whole thing. And so that's what we need when we are talking about education. It doesn't matter how much they know. It doesn't matter how much they go to school and how many good grades they got. If they are not trained in virtue, their education has been entirely null, entirely void. It didn't happen. They are not educated. So today in this show, that is a topic that we cover, and we have then 3 things to keep, and that's how we finish. The first one, there is in the soul of your child memory, intellect, and will. And according to that, there are 3 processes that you need to take care of when it comes to education. And that is correction, understanding. Understanding corresponds to instruction, and then training for the will. So you have correction, instruction, and training. And finally, the last thing is not the same. Instruction and education, they are not the same thing. Education is way more than just instructing your child. So we will go now with our story to end today's show. And if you have any questions or topics, you know where to send them. Go through the contact page. This has been The Catholic Mother with Father Zepeda. And this has been a production of the Catholic Wire. Thank you and God bless you. In today's examples of the saints, we have an example of Saint Jane Frances Vergniaud de Chantal. Now, Jane was born in January 1572. She married when she was only 19 years old, and her husband, the Baron de Chantal, he was around his 20s. Now, the first months of marriage, Jane passed in a rather unusual way, we would say today. During her first months of marriage, she prayed more than usual. She would spend some time reflecting upon her future life and thinking of how she wanted to be as a wife. And she would particularly try to be obedient and devoted to her husband, and this mostly in the matters regarding the administration of the property. Now, you need to know, the Baron de Chantal had a large property, but it hadn't been managed in the proper way. So the property was actually going downhill. They were losing money, they were not collecting the rents, they were being robbed by the employees, by the servants. So things were not going very well. Now, after only 3 months of marriage, the Baron de Chantal, the new husband, got called. He was summoned to Paris. And before leaving, he takes his wife, and they go out for a long walk around the property with, his 19-year-old wife. And he's explaining to her the whole situation of the property. And then he tells her, "I want you in charge of the administration." Jane was horrified at this prospect. She said, "No way." But the husband told her that, as my wife, it's your duty to be my second self. It's your duty to manage this or our belongings prudently. So it has to be you. And she was like, "No way, I'm not doing that." She was only 19 years old. She was very much afraid. This sweet little young girl, and there's all these people there, grown-ups, men, servants, farmers, who knows what. And so he says to her, "Listen." And he starts telling her about his mother. And he says to her, "My mother saved this property from ruin. She was administering everything in the property to the last, even though she had been suffering from cancer for several years. She never spoke of the cancer that she had. And finally, when it became known that she was sick, I remember how the doctors were preparing her to burn the cancerous flesh with hot irons. and they tried to chain my mother up, the husband said. And this is what my mother said. Reason and conscience are the strongest chains that can bind the Christian woman. Do not be afraid, I am used to help myself in suffering by looking at the crucifix. Now, as he finished telling her this story, she realized that she needed to be brave. She realized that that's the kind of wife she wanted to be. And so, hearing this example, the young 19-year-old wife accepted the burden and took the full administration of the property of the baron. That is our example of the saints today with Saint Jane Frances Vermillot de Chantal, and you can find this example in the book The Life of Saint Jane Frances by Emily Bowles.
Thank you for listening to the Catholic Wire. If you have found this show helpful, please say a prayer for all our collaborators. Don't forget to subscribe to our channels and share with your friends. For questions and comments, you may contact us at thecatholicwire.org.